Well, my first question is, did we get anybody in here from the railroads? No, they're not in here yet? Okay, good. One of my specialties, and I'll start off with this, one of my specialties is the experience that I've had in the job. And the great thing is that I've got two colleagues in here, Barbara, and I have Doug, that can correct me if I'm wrong. The thing I have over them is that I don't have to worry about the organization being mad at whatever I say. So I can say things pretty much the way it is, or what I've experienced. And based on that experience, what I'd suggest is that if you're looking for some funding, as soon as the railroad representative enters the room, we should all stand up and start applauding, clapping, and yelling wildly for the amount of funds that they've donated. That's one way to do it. But anyway, what I wanted to talk about is that there's, what I've gone through in my career is the experience with different types of designations, because the question came up earlier, well, what does that matter? And Terry, she gave us I think, a good starting point on that. And what I said earlier about the higher the sort of elevation of significance that's provided to a given location, site, if you will, usually is commensurate with a certain amount of activity or organizational priority that's given to the operations of that particular area. What that translates to is, what is the budget going to be, or how much attention is an agency going to give that particular area that you have in mind or that's important to you. And so two things that I wanted to talk about was that in terms of looking at some of the activities, and particularly with this last tour, is that one of my favorite programs, and hopefully, Barbara, I'm not stealing any thunder, but one of my favorite programs was the Heritage Areas that's administered by the Park Service, and largely because usually there's legislation, I know, that they're trying to make a lot of these heritage areas, and there's a number of them around the nation that exist already. And the 2018 tour reminded me a lot of some of the shows or the kind of activities that would go under a heritage area, linking various communities along a certain route or so. The heritage areas, when one is created, now there's a push to get a national template for these heritage areas, but each one of them has got its own separate piece of legislation. Usually it comes with funding that provides for a 10-year period of funding that's to get this area off to a sustainable, after the funding goes out, the idea is for the area to become sustainable to itself. There are certain derivatives of studies that are produced with a governing board and so forth, okay? That's one thing that would be good, and just the whole 2018 tour kind of reminds me of what you could do with that. The Summit Tunnel area itself being a more certain specific area, things like a national monument or national historic site. National monuments can be declared presidentially or by act of Congress. You have a national historic site, which is also legislation. And I think there are certain avenues you can get with that. With a monument designation, you have the ability to put in there, and usually there's some pretty common language, which is certain purposes won't be, for example, we've already heard from Phil this morning that this area is more of a recreation-oriented area in the land management plan of the Forest Service, so therefore recreation opportunities would not be diminished, say, by a monument status. You might have other things where it might explicitly say no mining, no oil drilling, those kinds of things. Fundamentally, you're trying to create a situation with a monument where you have compatibility with the stewardship envelope that this particular area and its importance deserves. With a National Historic Site, you could do something very similar. I was involved with the Great Towers legislation years ago with the Forest Service. Great Towers is basically, it's a very large estate of Gifford Pinchot in Pennsylvania, and it's near the town of Milford. And one of the things that we did that was a little different, and I think this would be important going forward, is in the funding scheme of things, you can always start off with a little excitement. For example, in an agency, if you're doing a monument, there's always attention given, so funding is shifted for a period of time. It's always very helpful to get it off the ground or so. But the idea is, what do you do for real sustainability in things? And one of the things that, to me, was very unique with the National Historic Site Act for Gray Towers was there was a clause put in there that basically allowed Gray Towers to act as its own entity, meaning that it was budgeted for in the Forest Service on an annual basis. It still is part of the budget, but Gray Towers can go out and seek its own funds. It can go out after grants, and one of the things that really impressed me was after that legislation was passed, all of the maintenance problems that Gray Towers had, they somehow managed to come up with a lot of matching grants and other kinds of things and it just really, the whole place became not only refurbished, but it became sort of a real jewel in the whole county local area because a lot of other organizations could partner and they could park money there. They could really work together much better. And so it's anything that we go forward with, I would say, might be legislatively conceived. We need to be very careful and make sure that the right kind of language gets in that. A quick example would be with the heritage areas. Oftentimes it's a Park Service program, and they'll say there's language usually in heritage areas which says, and other federal agencies may, cooperate. Well, I know what that translates to. If you're a forest supervisor, you don't have enough budget somewhere, and somebody says, well, we can do this if we want. Usually the answer is, no, we'll wait till we have more money, which that doesn't happen. That's not going to be the case with a federal unit, let's say. So I would just say we need to be careful so that the inclusion of language would be very specific to other federal agencies cooperating or something like that, and they're actually named in there to be partners. One thing that is good is I know that it was difficult with the Forest Service. I know they had problems with the partnerships and other things up until they had changes in partnership legislation. And I know that the fellow that's now sitting in my old seat has done a lot of work with partnerships and creative kind of planning. So there is some possibilities in terms of developing the kind of relationship with a federal, say, entity where your associations that are maybe affiliated with such endeavors could be real bona fide partners, and we can do cooperative fundraising or things like this. And all of that has to be components of what you're thinking about and should be included in whatever does go forward. Because I think what's important, as I see it, is that there's great energy with this group. I love it. That's why I'm here, actually. And you have a place in history, and it should be there. It'd be really great to see something that gets firmly established, something that you can point to that says, this whole group, boy, there's an accomplishment here. Look at this, and look at the economic viability of it, look at how it's accepted locally, look how it's making progress, and then continue from there and use that as the leverage for it to do some of the other things, because some of the other educational endeavors and things are great ancillary things that will, I think, add to the story real well.